Welcome to this rescheduled screening of Lynch Nation. I'm currently speaking to you from my kitchen, and we're incredibly grateful to the UK Asian Film Festival for organizing this, and also organizing this in this sort of radically new format, but perhaps not all that new now to most of us. The screening is presented by the UK Asian Film Festival and the South Asia Forum at Queen Mary at the University of London, which is a group of scholars trying to promote or put together critical scholarship on South Asia. So if you want to look that up, just Google South Asia Forum and Queen Mary. You've probably already seen the film, which is available through a link and is on YouTube right now, Lynch Nation. I'm not going to call it a brave and important film, even though it is both of those things, because very often we say something is brave and important, and that's a way of forgetting the difficulty that it's confronting us with. I think it's a diagnostic film in that it goes into the heart of what is rotten in India. And I think the title tells us what we need to know, nation, that the lynchings aren't exceptional or new or somehow to the side of what India is and what it is today, but at its very heart. And the film does this with grace, and it does it with really remarkable courage, and for which I think we should all be grateful. But because it is a diagnostic film, I think it also asks us to think about how we respond to it, not just to the film, but to what it depicts. I am going to hand over to my colleague Ashvin now, who is going to introduce the panelists and say a bit more about the film.
Thanks very much, Akshi, and good evening, everyone. For me, Lynch Nation epitomizes how majoritarianism under the Modi regime is inextricably linked to digital connectivity and new media forms. So an unholy alliance between technology and theocracy. As captured in the film, there's been a spate of digital pogroms issued by Hindu fundamentalist groups via WhatsApp and Facebook. There's also been dietary ethnocide, which is the policing of food preferences as an instrument of religion-based ethnic cleansing. So lots of turbulent dimensions that have been encapsulated, have been appraised in Lynch Nation. It's a very important film. And I'm pleased to say we have a distinguished panel of speakers who I'm just going to introduce. We have with us Amrit Wilson, who is a writer and activist on issues of race and gender in Britain and South Asian politics, including the rise of Hindu supremacist fascism in India and its outposts in the UK. She's a member of the South Asia Solidarity Group. Rohit K Dasgupta is a senior lecturer at Loughborough University. He's also a Labour councillor in the London borough of Newham, where he is Commissioner for Social Integration and Equalities. He's the author of Digital Queer Cultures in India. We have the co-director of the film, Furqan Faridi, who is a journalist and filmmaker from Kashmir and is currently studying documentary practice in the UK. So welcome to our panelists. Furqan, if I could start with you. All the speakers have around 10 minutes to present their thoughts, and then we're going to have a panel discussion and then open out the floor to any audience questions. So over to you, Furqan.
Thank you, Ash, and thank you, Akshi, and thank you, UK Asian Festival, for organizing this. It's very difficult to have screenings of this film as we have experienced in the past, and especially now with all that's happening, it's very difficult to get people together to watch a film, together. I will not speak a lot because I would like to take questions and the panel, but I'll briefly speak about how we went about making the film and so on. So we started the film in towards the end of 2017. All of us were working in the media, and we were, just seeing all this kind of barbaric violence, you know. And in the media, what happens is when you work every day, you sort of get desensitized to this violence because you every day you're seeing these, you know, like 5 people dead, 4 people killed, and so on. So that's why we decided to, you know, like step back and, you know, go for like a kind of reflective approach, because I feel that lynching um, lynching in itself is much more than a simple, you know, like act of violence. Because I was when we were researching for this, I came across many articles, you know, documenting lynching as it happened in the late 18th century in the US, of, you know, African American men. And there were like glaring similarities, not just, you know, in the not just in the wider context, but also in the act of violence, as it were. You know, people being hanged from trees, and then this whole, you know, made it was like a spectacle. So in that, what it does, it sends across a message to the you know, to the wider minority communities that the law is completely paralyzed, and, you know, the majority is in control now. And in that, so that inert crowd is replaced by now, you know, like these mobile phones which you spoke about, Ashwin. These videos being circulated all across, you know, with no discretion or anything, you know. So in that, it desensitizes, and, you know, it desensitizes and it demonizes the whole community. You know, it strips us of our very, you know, humanness. So in that sense, we were keen on doing a very like humane sort of approach, because we wanted to know. Actually, it was a journey for us, you know, as filmmakers. We wanted to know who these people are, you know. I don't know why we did that, but it was like we want to know. Because we also, I came across an article about Junaid, the boy who was killed on the train. And in that, it was on the Indian Express, I remember, and it was titled "A Boy Called Junaid." And I read that article, and it was like who this guy was actually. You know, we just know about, this guy as the guy who was killed on the train, but he liked biryani, he liked motorbikes, and so on. So this was, for me, this was the main, you know, question, you know, who these people were. And in that sense, I guess you just restore a sense of, you know, dignity and humanity, because, like I said, we tend to forget about all of that as we work in the media, and we see this kind of like, because it's been going down. I mean, now that I reflect back on what has happened after this film, I think we are in a much more you know, depressing situation, to be honest. I mean, we have seen lynchings in the Delhi riots recently. I don't want to speak much about it because I've not been in India, so I don't know what's the situation on ground since the last year. But yeah, this was our main impetus, and so we went across UP, Haryana, Gujarat, Jharkhand, Rajasthan, just speaking to people, you know, not even speaking, just listening to them, you know, like because I initially I was a bit apprehensive, because some time had passed, and you don't want people to, you know, just, you know, like reflect on, you know, their trauma. But when we went there, we realized that, you know, it was far from over. You know, like people really wanted to talk to us, and despite suffering, you know, so much, they are still, you know, battling even every day. So it was also, you know, obviously these are very sad stories, but I, like, for all of us, for me and all the other members of our team, it was also very hopeful, because when we met these people, especially the women in all these families, we saw like how their everyday life was now, you know, just resistance, you know, just like going to court, going to, and not, you know, not being bogged down despite facing, you know, this enormous fascist machinery. They were not, you know, bogged down, and that gave us a lot of hope. And that, you know, that really like drives me still today. So I think that's what I have to say for now. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Furqan. Perhaps we can pick up on those points when we have the discussion after. Rohit, would you like to share your thoughts?
Thanks, Ashwin. I've prepared a few comments, not just about the film, but also more broadly about what's happening in India right now. I kind of want to firstly start by saying that this was a very, very difficult film to watch. And I want to give my solidarity and thanks to Furqan and his co-directors for making this very, very courageous film. And I also actually want to thank UK Asian Film Festival and QMUL for hosting this panel and the discussion today, especially because I know that the problems that we are having now in having these spaces of dissent, of being able to talk about difficult conversations. I was just mentioning before the panel started about how I got into a discussion with someone on social media about the film and about what the film depicts, and being asked, really, is this really a film to be shown to a British audience? So I think it's really important that we have these discussions. The movie's title, Lynch Nation, accurately captures the reality that we are facing as a nation in India today. Lynchings of Muslims, of Dalits, lynching of students, but also lynching of ideas and thoughts, and the muzzling of dissent. And some lynchings are not just physical, as we are seeing the partisan media in India is working alongside the state in lynching people with lies, accusations, and character assassinations. The present political juncture in India is marked by the rise of the Hindu nationalist Bharatiya Janata Party, who alongside all of these kind of promises of further economic liberalization, welcoming global capital, is also a regime that is promoting an overtly Hindu fundamentalist vision of India. This idea of a Hindutva nation is also deeply connected, as Ashvin said, with the neoliberal digital Indian nationalism exemplified in government initiatives such as India Shining and Digital India, creating this modern Indian nation state and wanting to become a major player, of course. Christopher Jaffilot has spoken about the saffronization of the public sphere that has resulted in the banalization of Islamophobia and anti-Dalit violence. And as a media scholar, it would be amiss of me not to mention that whilst channels such as Republic TV, uncritically sharing government propaganda and have been responsible in the process of starting this warfare of misinformation, we've also seen in recent days liberal newspapers and channels are also taken to self-censorship or toning down content because of the difficulties that they're facing currently with the present regime, and also economic pressures that comes from advertising and so on. Most recently, we've seen the ways in which the Citizenship Act and the National Register of Citizens has renewed the debate on who belongs and who does not belong in this nation state of India. And in such a new scenario, not only is dissent being suppressed, but the very role played by the media in sustaining democracy is being crushed. As this film depicted, and Shakuntala Banerjee has argued, we have seen a rise of vigilante publics, groups such as the Gau Rakshaks and Sanskari Rakshaks, and other these kind of potential names of kind of safeguarding culture. And this is not just happening, people patrolling the streets, but also, as Ashvin mentioned, it's happening on WhatsApp, it's happening on Facebook, it's happening on Twitter. And they have been emboldened to take into their own hands the role of the state in a democratic polity. So who belongs to the state of India? And I'm kind of reminded of Spivak and Butler's conversation a couple of years ago, where they said, and I'll just quote, the state is supposed to service the matrix for the obligations and prerogatives of citizenship. It is that which forms the conditions under which we are juridically bound. We might expect that the state presupposes modes of juridical belongings, at least minimally. But since the state cannot be precisely what expels and suspends modes of legal protection and obligation, the state can put some of us in quite a state. It can signify the source of non-belonging, even producing that non-belonging as a quasi-permanent state. Just a couple of years ago, as Amrit will remember, when we met, we called one of the many protests outside the Indian High Commission when 3 JNU students, Umar Khalid, Anirban Bhattacharya, and Kanhaiya Kumar, were arrested on charges of sedition and anti-national sloganeering. This followed closely on the heels of Rohit Vemula's suicide in Hyderabad in January 2016. Both cases reignited a debate on freedom of speech and of freedom to dissent. We know that the present government, and I shall also caveat this by saying government in general, is worried about the role of media and culture in being able to tell the truth. We saw this when the film Muzaffarnagar Baki Hai, a film on communal violence in Uttar Pradesh, has also been disrupted and having discussions around it. We have seen university campuses, the very spaces that have engendered politics of dissent, where many like me cut my political teeth muzzled. And to see an assault on those spaces that promise and encourage to explore power relation, status quo and privilege is very personal. This film, and I know Akshi didn't want us to use the word brave, but it is very brave for not just bringing the voice of personal voices of the families and the victims, Imtiaz, Majlum, Umar, Aklak, and so on, but also through those personal stories challenge those of us of South Asian descent sitting in the United Kingdom of how do we address this over here. It would not be wrong to say that the politics of South Asia is having an effect on British politics. As we saw in 2019, British Indians campaigned for many reasons against the Labour Party. We saw within the Tory party, British Asians are playing an important role in trying to stop anti-caste legislation, and especially like the role that they play within places like Harrow and so on. But also how this is breaking down social cohesion and united voices in our local communities over here. Our religious, caste, gender, or sexual identities should not endanger us. What we have seen in this film is how this was allowed to happen for several years and continue to. So how can we sit silent when we heard in the film of how a 15-year-old was killed for simply arguing over a seat? We heard how Vasram Sarvaiya, a Dalit man, was beaten up and how the toxic culture of untouchability permeates his life every day. How dangerous cow politics of Gau Rakshaks are literally stripping people of their livelihoods and their lives. It is a difficult film. And when you realize that politicians like Gyandev Ahuja in the film can brazenly talk of killing, he still remains in post, flexing his political power, we know we are in trouble. I want to reiterate that the founding of our nation, India, which for many of my forefathers and yours gave their lives for, were based on secularism, freedom, and values of tolerance and justice. Satyagraha, the practice of truth, and Swaraj, of self-organizing and resistance, were core to that struggle for freedom. What we face today is a struggle for those values. Today, Satyagraha begins with challenging falsities and regimes of violence in a struggle for a better India and a better world. So let me end with the words of the famous Marxist poet Faiz Ahmad Faiz, whose wise words brought down a dictatorship in Pakistan and continues to be a source of inspiration for progressives worldwide. And I know the sloganeering has been taken on by students in India. When the enormous mountains of tyranny blow away like cotton under our feet, the feet of the oppressed, when the earth will pulsate deafeningly and on the heads of our rulers, when lightning will strike, we shall witness, it is certain we shall witness. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Rohit, for exemplifying how transdiscursive this film is, the multiple discourses that are all kind of aggregated relating to the economic, political, social, cultural, and religious dimensions. A lot of food for thought, which brings me to ask you, Amrit, to present your thoughts.
Thanks. Well, I'd first like to start by saying that this was really a very powerful film. It kind of hits you in the gut. And one reason for that, I think, is the way in which we hear about it through the voices of the families. And we hear, and it becomes very personal. Almost the whole film is constructed through the voices of people who've been affected and people who are fighting for justice. And it's also, in some ways, a very sensitive film. I know Furqan has talked about it being a humane film, but you know, humane films are not always as sensitive as this one. And the sensitivity to me, which was very striking, was that while you could feel the pain and the really deep sorrow of people, you could also see that they were fighting for justice. You could also hear that their determination to do that under those circumstances. And so, for example, Pehlu Khan's son was just, just listening to that, I could hear that it was very deeply inspiring as well as Mariam Khatum, the wife of Alimuddin Ansari. And it's a very brave film. I know that, we don't want to say that, but we have to say that in a sense, partly because filmmakers are under threat now. We know of Rahul Rao and Sabha Diwan, who have both been summoned in the context of the Delhi pogrom, well, supposedly being on some WhatsApp group, right? And for me, this film also had a very personal significance. And that was that in 2017, around the time when Furqan and his other co-directors were making the film, we in South Asia Solidarity Group were organizing a protest for Independence Day, 15th of August. And we decided to call it Resist the Republic of Fear, right? And we decided to carry posters of the people who had been killed. And so in a way, all those people we heard of in the film, I have pictures of them in my room, So I know Junaid, I know Akhlaq, I know Lalji Sarwaya, and I know all of them. And that, in a sense, also shows us a lot about international solidarity, because when I say I, it's not just I, it's a group of us. And that group becomes bigger when you think that we had around 500 people at that demonstration, which was small compared to what we've had more recently, but still. The point I want to make is that it's important for us to realize and to call a spade a spade. What we see in India is fascism. Let's not fool ourselves. Let's not use alternative words like authoritarian regime or somehow a bit fundamentalist here and there. This is a Hindu supremacist fascist regime, which is also deeply neoliberal. Some people talk about it as being traditional. But in fact, most of these traditions which are being floated were never there before. I mean, I grew up in India, part of my education in India. I never heard of people getting enraged if a cow was killed or if somebody ate beef, I mean, okay, some people didn't approve of it. But this scale of, it simply was not there. So it has been manufactured. And the film really shows this very clearly. It shows the nature of fascism. If we analyze the things which come out in the film, they add up to that. Because we see the attacks as being carefully planned. The attack on Akhlaq's home and the killing of Akhlaq, for example. And a very telling point was when they say, "We've kept you here," they say to the priest. And that is just incredibly ominous, So they're so carefully planned, so clinically executed, and they're state-sponsored, because in almost every case, we have the collaboration of the police. And then if we look at the Gaurakshaks themselves, again, the film tells us that some of them were actually from the Bajrang Dal. And what is the Bajrang Dal? That is the stormtroopers of the RSS, which is the parent party of the BJP, modeled on the Nazi party, drawing inspiration from Mussolini's black shirts. And these things are actually written about by the ideologues of the RSS. And they're not being made up by me as an activist or other people on the left. It's actually, there in black and white. And so we have the Gaurakshaks are also now sponsored by the state and have been for a long time. It's actually a job, it's employment. this is something which would be, 10, 15 years ago, we could not have imagined this. So what is happening in India then? I mean, some people have said this is some sort of a modernist project, but I have to say that I don't agree. I think what it is a project to create a Hindu state, the Hindu Rashtra, which is based on caste hierarchies, is based on the hatred of Muslims and Christians, is based on misogyny. And in this state, we have Muslims and Christians categorized and other minority religions categorized as second-class citizens. But this film actually represents the first phase of this creation of the Hindu Rashtra. And we are now deep into the second phase. The first phase started in 2014 with Modi coming to power. And since then we have Modi 2, which is when he's come back. And we find, as Rohit mentioned, the citizenship laws, which disenfranchise India's Muslim population. Again, an extremely ominous sign when we think that this is exactly what the Nazis did. And we also have a pogrom taking place in the heart of the Indian capital. We have the repression of students, which Rohit mentioned, but on a scale which was unknown before, and really quite unique for most countries I know of. We have the killing and the silencing of all those who dissent. People like Gauri Lankesh, the feminist journalist, for their principles. And we have now, most recently, attempts to impose the Manusmriti, which is the Manusmriti as the ancient laws of Manu, in all their glorious casteism and misogyny and imposition of caste hierarchies. So with the notion, the whole notion of Muslims as eating beef, as killing cows, this trope essentially carries on. We still know it's true, but now it's hardly needed because you don't have to say somebody has eaten beef. You can just kill him for being a Muslim. But now there's a new trope has come up. And this trope is that there's love jihad. So, Muslim men marrying Hindu women, or people crossing caste boundaries in their relationships. These have now, most recently, I think yesterday, we heard from the Chief Minister of UP, Yogi Adityanath, that this would be declared an illicit love affair. So it's against the law. What law? I mean, this is certainly not in the Constitution. And now, in a way, whatever errors Modi makes, there's a bigger Modi in the wings, and that is Adityanath. And we know that, to go back to the film, that Pehlu Khan's, the killers, who were all eventually allowed to, apart from two who were, I think, minors, and they were given some quite derisory sentence. The rest were all let out. And one of those people was in the front row of Adityanath's campaign meetings. So, this does sound a very, very abysmal situation. But one thing I do have to say is that just recently, maybe in the last few months, there's a kind of feeling that people are not taking it anymore, There is a kind of resistance coming up, which is, which, I don't know, I just hold my breath and hope that this will grow, And there are elements of this which are shown in the film. What's interesting also about this film is that it has so much in it. It's so rich in terms of the showing us the symptoms of fascism, showing us the different ways in which it acts through the population. And one of the things which is quite optimistic, which is showed, is the Dalit Muslim unity. And of course, you know, something like this in a country like India doesn't go just along a straight line increasing all the time, you know. There are ups and downs, but it hasn't gone away. For example, Chandrasekhar Azad going to who is the leader of the Bhima Army, the Dalit organization. After at the time of I think it was at the time of the citizenship protests, I'm not quite sure the exact time, he went to the steps of the Jama Masjid and he made a speech in solidarity with Muslims. And this was really extremely inspiring. And he has done that again more recently. So there is hope. I mean, one can never give up hope. If you think of people like Mariam Khatun fighting under those circumstances, who are we not to hope, you know? And I have to say that we need a lot more films like this. What we need also is international solidarity. And I'd really like to thank the UK Asian Film Festival and the South Asia Forum at QMUL for holding this, because this is a form of international solidarity. And as spaces are closed down in India, we must have more spaces here to make up for it. So I think I'll just leave it at that and just say congratulations for this amazing film.
Thanks so much, Amrit, and also Rohit and Furqan. We're going to open up to questions now, but I'm going to use chair's privilege to ask you the first question, but also just to draw out some of the things that you've said because they were so striking. I was really struck, Furqan, when you spoke about the film as an act of listening, because that really does come out when watching it. And it also raises this question about who listens after this incredibly devastating act of violence takes place, and people are left to live in the same place and within the same community where it took place. And I mean, of course, it's a question I'm particularly interested in because I'm interested in psychoanalysis and it's at the heart of that. But politically, it's such a key question because the words that kept reappearing in the film were about pain and were about grief. And at one point, there's this incredible sentence where a woman whose husband has been killed says, "Do these people know grief? Have they ever experienced grief that they go around inflicting this on other people?" And it raises this question about what forms of psychic distress are being inflicted upon people. So it's not just this sort of one murderous act of violence, but what people are left to live with, something that doesn't end easily, something that is incredibly sort of taken in both into the psyche and the body. And I think that was something that your film draws attention to, just this relentless aftermath. I was also, when I was listening to you, Rohit, and you drew attention to the struggles of decolonization and mentioned them as an inspiration. I think this is related to the question that I want to ask. I think that it's equally important to remember all the ways in which the Indian nation was founded on occupation, was founded on foundational forms of injustice, whether they were military occupations of people and places that perhaps didn't, and not perhaps, certainly didn't want to be part of the Indian nation, or of groups within the sort of larger territorial body of India. And I think, I think especially outside of India, there is such a regard for the inspirational moments of decolonization that this other equally important and very painful history tends to get buried or sometimes censored. And you spoke about censorship as well. And I feel like this certainly happens when we talk about South Asian history. So in relation to that, I think if you could speak, all of you, if you have any thoughts about these, what to my mind seem to be two slightly different forms of violence that are visited upon various bodies of people in India or in places occupied by India, where there is violence that is state-sponsored, but not carried out by somebody necessarily wearing a uniform, or not carried out by somebody who has been provided arms by the state. And then there are those forms of institutionalized violence, especially in areas covered by the Armed Forces Special Powers Act, where the agent of violence also sort of wears the insignia of the state. And I've always wondered what's going on, because we know it's the same people, but what sort of distinction is being made there, and what does that say about India? So over to you now.
Amrit, do you want to go first, or?
Okay. Well, I think, one of the major subjects to talk about here, well, two aspects is Manipur and Kashmir, And as a lot of Kashmiris say, what Kashmir has experienced is now, India pales into insignificance compared to that. And of course, it's going on and is now, become much more of a settler colony. So there's no question about this was, this was actually colonization, not decolonization for the Kashmiris. They didn't get independence, I think in the case of Manipur, perhaps it was slightly different, although, the injustices they have faced have led to, the most horrific repression. So yes, I mean, one cannot talk about decolonization in such a broad sense. Having said that, I think, for the Muslim population in India, I think things have varied, and one cannot say, for example, Akhlaq's brother, the point he was making, I think was, it was very moving in a way that, these were their friends. And we've heard this over and over again for example, in Muzaffarnagar, where there was basically a pogrom and women were raped. And the people who did that were people known to them. And something similar also happened in the anti-Sikh pogroms. So, I think there are a lot of complexities there. And these complexities are to do with levels of power at various times, whether through political parties or in terms of caste. Of course, the people who suffered all through were the Dalits. I mean, this was, partition didn't bring a lot of relief to them, and they were settled, when they came into Delhi, for example, they were settled in the worst areas selectively. Sometimes in mud huts, within the town, whereas other people who'd come with them, more of the oppressor caste people, they were given eventually good housing. So the whole situation was replicated, saying basically, look, you were oppressed there and you're going to be oppressed here. So it made very little difference. And then we also know about what happened in Bengal, which was, a horrendous pogrom. So of Dalits. So I think, the question, I think all of these in a way are separate questions, because India is a huge country with a lot of different, lot of different aspects of power and control. And I think, that's why in many contexts, the whole notion of decolonization, dare I say this, can be somewhat less than useful, I mean, obviously fighting colonialism is important, but I'm saying talking about decolonization as a concept, and it's become a buzzword now, we're always decolonizing this and that and the other, you know, and what does it really mean in the end if you're not able to tease out all the complexities within it, as you were saying yourself?
If I just pick up on from where Amrit left, I think you're absolutely right, Amrit. And I think actually going back to your question about censorship and also, you know, what is the story that gets said? I think you're absolutely right. I think the formation of India and the kind of the bigger the history that we hear also kind of hides within it the many voices and those who were suppressed in the creation of that nation state, you know, whether they were Dalits, whether they were Muslims, or whether they were, you know, lands on which, you know, India now claims territory. So absolutely, you're right. I think there is this bigger question of, and we know that the Indian government is doing that very well in terms of what is the history that we are reading. We know history textbooks are currently being rewritten by the current Indian government, which takes away, anything that they find, does not conform with their idea of what India should be or what story of India they want people to read. So there is that big problem. But also, it's a transnational issue. You know, we've seen what's happening in places like California, where I think there is quite a big Hindu lobby which is trying to change textbooks over there as well, or in terms of wanting to talk about one particular story of Hinduism and what it looks like. So I think we all need to be, constantly vigilant of what's happening. Again, it's definitely happening a lot in the United Kingdom, where we see a very sanitized version of what India and the Indian government is. Talking to people over here sometimes to me feels like talking to a blank wall, because whatever you say, it just doesn't seem to penetrate that there is a serious problem. I like what you said, Amrit, about that we are in Modi 2.0. I think things have changed a lot since when he became Prime Minister in 2014. I remember back then I had written an email to John Cryer, who was my Labour MP at that time, absolutely shocked at him being given an invitation to come and speak at the British House, at the House of Commons. And at that point, I think no one imagined he would become the Prime Minister. And I was told that, of course, it was a small group of people. And we know that, all of the, he is being sanitized now around the world. And we have to be, quite militant about it, that's not the story that gets told, that the reality of the situation, is what we represent. In terms of some of the other issues around AFSFA and institutional violence, and what gets censored, I think you're right. It's not always people in uniforms, right? We've just seen very recently, and picking up on the issue of love jihad as well, we've seen very recently a Tanishq ad, a jewelry ad. I don't think, you would have ever imagined that would be of something that, it was a simple jewelry ad, for those who don't know, on the occasion of, I can't remember if it was just a couple of weeks ago, which showed a simple kind of a happy story of a Hindu wife in a Muslim household celebrating a Hindu festival. And there was a huge hue and cry. I think I heard of jewelry stores being smashed because of showing this interreligious relationship. Things I don't think even, in 2014, things didn't seem that bad as it seems right now. I remember, and this is again from a very personal perspective, when I was in Calcutta in November of last year, for the first time, I actually heard on the streets people talking about Jai Ram and Jai Hanuman, things that, and I grew up there. I was there for 20 years of my life. I've never heard that. It is quite a North Indian God, but also those are things I've never heard. And seeing those things permeate in everyday culture, everyday life, was definitely something that threw me off. So yes, it's definitely increasing. And I think we just need to be constantly vigilant and provide these spaces of dissent where we can just say things are really bad. We need things to change. And hopefully at the coming state elections, we might see there will be a change, because actually with the CAA, the Citizenship Amendment Act, 56% of the state governments opposed it. So hopefully that's going to be something that we'll see in the coming state elections next year.
Something, sorry, I forgot to mention something, but can I just add something to this? You know, about when you're talking about decolonization, the group who really are still completely colonized are the Adivasis, you know. And recently we've seen the selling off of huge tracts of land, you know, making some 1 million Adivasi families, displacing them and dispossessing them. And I think, you know, if you really talk about colonialism, then that is the ultimate in colonization. And that fits so neatly into the neoliberal model which India is following.
Thank you. Furqan, did you want to come in? Or there's also some questions in the chat which we can turn to, unless you had something to say before that.
No, I agree with Amrit and Rohit when they say that, you know, we are deep into it, deep into, you know, Modi 2.0 and whatnot. And I think it's important to, I think someone mentioned that Modi is being sanitized, and now Modi will be the new, you know, this sort of soft Hindutva guy, and Yogi Adityanath will be the next, you know, that's what I'm feeling. That's why I think these things are very important, you know, like documenting stuff, researching stuff, and having these kind of debates. Now, I mean, when we were doing this, I didn't realize, you know, that we would look back and see, you know, now I do realize the importance of, you know, just go out and like just documenting stuff for the sake of memory before everything is, you know, changed and sanitized. And also, you mentioned about, you know, who gets to tell the story is very important. And I think it does come across as a bit sensitive because our team, like if you look at, I mean, I didn't realize it at the time, but now when I think about it, most of the people, like it was me and my co-director Shaheen, Ashfaque. So, you know, it's all, although we are from, you know, then people we have shown in the film, there's obviously a kind of, you know, class divide, but we are also culturally, you know, Muslim. So I think it's very important that we tell our own stories. I think that creates a difference, certainly.
Could I just pick up on that point, Furqan, and also go back to the notion of censorship? So there are very draconian censorship regulations in relation to film in India under the aegis of the CBFC, commonly known as the Indian Censor Board. So this is a very practical filmmaker's question. How did you go about gaining access to the participants in the documentary? Because you managed to reveal very human stories of human pathos, but also very powerful stories presenting an optimistic possibility of resistance and resilience that we get towards the end of the film. So tell us a bit more about gaining access and interacting on this personal level with all of the respondents in the film.
Gaining access, I was in Delhi at the time working for a website. My other Ashfaq was in Kerala and he came to Delhi. So all of us were in, you know, journalistic circles. We used to go for protests, things like that. And we met some people at the press club in Delhi it was a Not in My Name. There was a campaign which Sabha Diwan and Rahul Roy who started, and they had organized a protest, and I met some people there. And at the time we had decided to document some of these things. And that's how we got access to a lot of people, just through like networks, you know, like, and I realized that, you know, if you have like an intention and a clear, you know, plan, you know, this is what we want to do, people are willing to help you, you know. I mean, this film we made with literally like no money, you know, there was no money involved. It was a very slow process because, you know, most of the times we were just sitting, you know, not being able to go and shoot. So yeah, it was slow, but and once we established contact, there were all like people, there are so many like organizations working on ground, and these are some of the organizations demonized by the mainstream media, you know, Jamaat Islami Hind, Students Islamic Organization. I mean, I am also like, you know, not a very I'm a bit skeptical about organizations which have, like religious affiliations. But when I went there to all these places and saw like the kind of work that they were doing on ground, especially Jamaat and Students Islamic Organization, I was like literally, blown away, like the kind of work they were doing. And they provided us with not just access, but also, in a lot of these villages, we stayed in madrasas, we stayed in mosques, and we stayed in schools which these organizations were running. They got us in touch with, local lawyers who were working there. And once we turned up, I guess it was, just being, like sensitive and, just listening to people. And, a lot of people all of us, like Shaheen, he was the main guy, like the director of the film. And now he works for the Caravan. And he was very, he had this is basically his approach is like, being very quiet and just being at the background. This is his like visual style, if you can say that. And yeah, and especially with some of the families, we had a very good relationship, and I'm still in touch with them. For instance, Junaid's family, I still speak to them. I speak to their mother, and they, we just, I don't know, we hit it off, so to speak. Like when they invited us to their homes, we had food there. Even when I came here to the UK, I called them. They were very happy, and so on. So, and as far as the censor board is concerned, that was a very difficult one, because we did not have a censor certificate, so essentially all public screenings are illegal. I mean, they are okay, but if they know about you, that you're doing this, that you're doing that, then you can get into trouble. So we had a few I think a lot of people are asking that also. Yes, the film has been screened in India many times, but it was mostly, like progressive spaces, universities, and, our friends. So we had quite a good run in the beginning, and to be honest, I didn't expect that also. And also we had some international screenings during that time, towards the end of last year, 2019, at Westminster, in Leiden, and in a lot of other places. And then suddenly what happened is, like, we were having a screening in Jamia Nagar in Delhi with one organization, and someone filed an FIR against the organizer, not against the filmmakers, against the organizer. And also the person who had screened the film in Leiden, their name was also, mentioned somewhere. So we were like, wow, what the hell is happening here? And suddenly I had like all these people, come to me and like asking me, do you have legal protection? And I was just, like, it was just me and my flatmates literally made this film, and we had no idea about, like legal protection, etc. So then we spoke to like some senior filmmakers and so on, and they advised us, to be very, be very low key and so on, not have many screenings. So I went back and deleted all my, like Facebook posts about screenings and so on, because at the time I was also applying for a visa for the UK, and this was also when Article 370 was abrogated. So a lot of stuff was going on, and I was just like, wow, I don't have any. But then we spoke to some, lawyers and so on. So we stopped having screenings after that. So that was a bit sad, because we were having, it was finding, like many, spaces. A lot of people were willing to screen our film, and we had, good discussions. There's this film collective. I don't know if you've heard of it. It's called Cinema of Resistance. It's like a film collective run by Sanjay Joshi in India, and they helped us a lot. Actually, they were the ones who screened it in places where we wanted it to be screened, like in a small village in Bihar, in Gorakhpur, in all these places, because we never thought, we didn't make this film with the intention of, going to film festivals and so on. Yeah, but the censor is a very difficult one, because after that, someone advised us to get a censor certificate, but I don't think we still have gotten it done.
Thanks very much, Furqan. I have one last question before we turn to address the multitude of questions in the chat function. So this is for Amrit. Amrit, there have been recent attempts to universalize the notion of caste discrimination as a blueprint to address social and racial discrimination in the States. most notably Isabel Wilkerson's book on caste. Surprisingly, she doesn't comment on the mob lynching under the Modi regime and the rise of the RSS, strangely, seems paradoxical. But I wondered if you could comment on the depiction of caste discrimination in Lynch Nation, relating it to the scenario in the context here in the UK, where it is not a kind of anomalous phenomenon. It is quite clear and present within Indian communities here in the UK. So do you have any perspectives on in that?
Well, I mean, the sort of conflating of race and caste, I mean, it's useful for some purposes because there are some similarities, but, you know, from a theoretical point of view, it's a bit problematic because they're a bit different, you know. I think from the UK point of view, that's a really interesting question because I remember, you see, we in South Asia Solidarity Group have tended to work with Caste Watch UK, which is the biggest Dalit organization in this country. And I remember when UNA happened, you know, we were in touch with the leaders of the Caste Watch UK, and they said, look, we have to do something. And so we had this like really massive protest. And we actually more or less took over the whole space of the Indian High Commission across the road as well. And then we did a small skit about the Gaurakshaks, you know. So that was quite, you know, that was quite a good thing to do. So there's a lot of, you know, anger, and people feel it, you know, because a lot of people have, you know, who have migrated here came from the villages, you know. Okay, they've done well here. Some have gone up in class and so on. But those memories don't die, you know. They're still there of the kind of humiliations they had to face. And here in Britain as well, they've had very hard times, you know, in terms of being prevented from going to temples, being discriminated at work, being called names. In intercaste marriages, often the parents-in-law give them a very hard time, you know. So yes, I think there's a real sort of resonance there and a real feeling of anger. So that's, you know, that's been ongoing in terms of they're always being ready to respond, to do something. I mean, even this time of the rape of the Dalit women, they wanted to do things, but, you know, under lockdown, they were not able to. So, you know, we did something small on our own, but you can't do much, you know, because in fact, they tried to hold a protest in front of the Indian High Commission. This is the groups who were particularly affected, you know. And they were told that that they would not be allowed, and this was actually not true because you know, the rule that only 6 people should be there was not valid at that time for demonstrations. But obviously, the Indian High Commission had intervened and tried to stop them. So.
Thanks, Amrit. Right, I'd just like to read out one of the questions that's come in. Question for Furqan. Have you screened in India? I think you've already mentioned this, and what was your experience with the far right who seem to have emerged because of the BJP?
Do they mean like their reaction to the film, is it?
I presume that is the question, yes.
To be honest, like I said, we have screened it in relatively safe spaces, but I have had instances of people not being, you know, aggressive or anything, but just doing, you know, like asking a lot of kind of, you know, like, what about questions, you know, like, what about Bajrang Dal people killed or something. I don't have the tolerance to, you know, answer all that. So I just say, you make a film about that and I'll support you or whatever. But like, yeah, we have, the screenings weren't very easy, but like I said, yeah, there is still, you know, there is a kind of progressive space in India that is willing to, you know, essentially risk their, you know, like safety to screen a film such as this, which when I saw it, I didn't realize that it would be, you know, controversial and so on. But yeah, no, we have had screenings in the past. And I would also like to say that if people want to get an access to this film and screen it elsewhere, I can send them the link and the password, or I think you have the link and you can send it to all people who can leave their emails. I think that's the best way to distribute a film such as this.
Thank you, Furqan. That's very generous of you. Um, there's another question that asks about the use of lynching, decapitation, rape, and firing squads, mass graves, and public flogging seen in India in relation to minorities. In France by Muslim extremists, in Bosnia by Serbian army, and in Pakistan during Zia-ul-Haq's draconian martial law, respectively. Seen as psychological tools of oppression, used time and again by political movements for political gains and annihilation of minority groups. And the state's establishment uses these tools with impunity, returning to the psychological dimension that I think Akshi referred to earlier. Would any of the panelists wish to comment? I think it's just a general comment there, but do any of you have any thoughts on the psychological tools that have been wielded?
I'd like to just say something briefly, not so much about psychological tools, but I think it's quite important to distinguish between different movements depending on whether they are part of the state or not, and I think that's a very key point, because, we can't compare the violence of say, Islamic terrorist groups to the terrorism of a Hindu state, I think it's quite problematic to do that and could get quite confusing. I mean, obviously, the psychological aspect is extremely important, because it's just fear, isn't it? It causes, extreme fear, and therefore, damps down on all dissent and resistance. But at least that's their aim.
Yeah, I don't have anything to add to that either. Thank you, Amrit, for pointing out the distinctions between the various examples cited in the comment, even if they're trying to draw attention to, I suppose, an important axis of what violence does. I'll put this in the chat, but there's a really excellent essay called Freud in Abu Ghraib, which just goes into some of those questions. So. But moving on to the next question in the chat, this is from Deepti Yadav, and she asks, I'm interested to know what the panelists think can be done to expand individuals' sense of personal identity to transcend religious fundamentalism, prejudice, and create communities which are committed to nonviolence and understanding. And what role can the international community play in helping to improve the situation? So yes, whichever one of you would like to go first with that.
Yeah, okay, I'll take that one. Maybe let me respond to the second bit of it about what role can international community play. I think the first thing is, and something that I've seen has worked, especially in Britain, is it's really useful to lobby your MPs and lobby politicians about what's happening, because they are all in very important select committees and so on, which are quite influential in terms of what decisions get taken. So I remember when Modi was invited in 2014, I remember writing to my Labour MP of that time and basically saying that I don't understand. We did have a conversation. I was reassured that it was a small clique and not all of them wanted him there. Unfortunately, he was still there. And of course, there is a process of sanitization that has already started happening. So I would definitely say that's one thing to do. Amrit will know this much better than me, but there are also, I would say, get involved with organizations like the South Asia Solidarity Group and other kind of more pressure organizations around, because again, they play a really, really important role of going out, becoming the voice and actually raising this issue on a very grassroots level. And going back to the issue, and I think a good example of this is, the way in which a certain segment of the Indian community has been working very closely with the Conservative Party for in kind of opposing anti-caste legislation. I think is a very, very good example that there is something over here about electoral politics, and there is something that we can all do in terms of using our voices. I would also say, some of these things happen on a very local level. So get involved with your kind of local representatives. So I know, for example, in Newham, we have had some very, very good discussions around Islamophobia. In fact, for those of you who know, it's Islamophobia Awareness Month in November. So there is going to be lots of events. And I would say, let it not just be like an exercise of like, right, this is what Islamophobia is about, but actually let's use evidence of what's happening around the world, what's happening in India, to kind of raise those very important questions. So that's something we've been doing on a local, as a local politician. So I would say definitely get involved.
Amrit, Ashvin, Furqan, anything to add to that?
Well, I suppose I could just add a few things. I mean, I think, it's really important when we talk about what we can do for India, we think also about what's happening in this country. I mean, I find it just absolutely staggering that the events of the last few days when Jeremy Corbyn is being targeted as an anti-Semite, and yet Boris Johnson, who's written a whole book which is basically anti-Semitic, is getting off the hook, And I think, when it comes to Islamophobia, I think we have to also be aware that it's not just about personalities, but the Tory party is actually very closely aligned to the BJP and works with it. I mean, what more can one say? It's got, at least 3 ministers who are members, admirers of Modi, and one of them is, great admirer of the RSS, And at the same time, they're trying to back 2 horses. They're trying to also get in. Obviously, they are already in with Keir Starmer. I mean, and the number of, talking about abuse, I mean, the number of abusive emails, and not emails so much as on Twitter, that we get from these British Hindu Forum and so on. But I think the other thing which sometimes I find disturbing is that people classify the South Asian community as one monolith, like, okay, there's the Hindus and then there's the rest, the Kashmiris. And actually it isn't really like that, I mean, there's people who came here in the 60s, 50s, 60s, 70s. I mean, they're a different group from the kind of IT people who have come more recently and who are much more middle class, much more pro-Hindutva and so on, And at the same time, there's also a lot of extreme poverty in the South Asian community. So I think, we need to be, as South Asians, we should be aware of that if we are going to be doing things in Britain.
Yeah, and I'm going to move on to the next question, but I also just wanted to add, especially since, supposedly festival season is coming up, that this is a good time to ask yourself uncomfortable questions about your family and caste identity, and also like forms of pleasure, and for not for these like difficult, uncomfortable things to sort of go out of the room or out of the window when these times of the year come up. So Alice Hudard asks, Furqan mentioned that the ongoing desire of the families and communities to speak out and resist as providing hope. Was there any reluctance amongst those interviewed to speak out on camera or so publicly? And also they say, thank you for sharing this powerful film with us.
You're welcome, Alice. And I think mostly we didn't have, people were willing to speak. I don't recall many instances of. Oh, I think yes, Akhlaq's son. He was in the Air Force, and we got in touch with him, and we were trying to, because he was also injured in the incident. We were in touch with him, but due to the like security protocol, he lived in like an Air Force area, so he wasn't. Yeah, he didn't agree to speak eventually, and of course, we did not want to make anyone uncomfortable. Also, we wanted everyone to be willing and willing to speak. Not, we didn't have to try like to convince. I don't remember having to convince anyone, because the thing is that before going to their houses and to like all these places, we would be in touch with them for a long time. We would be always speaking on the phone, just discussing things, what we are doing, or we would meet someone that they know. So they would speak on our behalf. So no, we did not. They weren't reluctant to speak out on camera. I was in fact a bit surprised by that, because I would think people would be a bit apprehensive and worried about their safety, or a lot of other things. But no, they weren't. They were quite willing.
Thank you. So I think that brings us to the end of the questions.
Akshi, if I could just interject, I think we've received a couple of questions in advance from the film club, the UK Asian Film Festival Film Club. So if I could just quickly get round to those as well. It's from Junaina, and she poses the question: following the BJP's rule and such growing communalism, do Muslims in India ever speak of leaving the country and taking refuge somewhere else? And she also asks if anything has happened since the making of the film, and did the families get any justice? Again, open to any. Furqan, perhaps you could comment.
Okay. Of course, there's a lot of talk about people wanting to leave India, Muslims, but I think you have to also recognize that it is a very privileged position to have. Not everyone can, it is easy for me to come here. It is not easy for most people, especially Muslims, because of the socio-economic conditions that they are in. What was the second question? Sorry.
Yeah, the second question is, has anything happened since the film in terms of the families getting a modicum of justice?
I think in all these cases, only maybe in one case in Latehar, there has been some sort of justice, which I'm not so sure of. I mean, the Akhlaq lynching happened in 2015, right? And that is where the film begins. That is also for us and a lot of people in India. That is kind of where we put the dot. Like, okay, this is when it's. Although there have been cases before also, that was in 2015, and still there has been no justice. That's what we have to realize, that the whole machinery is in place. It's not just the politicians or the police. I mean, look at the courts; they are full of RSS people. In one of I think it was in Junaid's case, during one of the hearings, that they realized that one of the public prosecutors had an affiliation with the RSS or something, was it? So yeah, we are up against a huge, monstrous machinery. No, but there has not been. In fact, in some of the cases, as we have seen, the accused have been felicitated and have received heroes welcome in their villages and been felicitated by BJP leaders in public view. So yeah.
Is that all the questions you have from the film club, Ashvin?
Yes, it was just the two questions.
Okay, so I'm going to ask Amrit, Rohit, and Furqan if you have any closing comments, and also to just thank the UK Asian Film Festival once again, and for everybody attending, for watching the film and taking part in this discussion.
Do you want to go first, Rohit?
Yeah, no, I don't think I've got much more to add. I think that thank you for inviting us. I think this was a really important conversation to have, and thank you, Furqan, for making this film. I think it's and I really wish that we can show this in more spaces over here in the UK. And I think, as Amrit said, there have been different. The South Asian community is not a monolith. There are different people all over. And I think the more places we can show this film and have more engender, more discussions, I think the more important it would be. But I don't have anything more to add. Just thank you.
No, I also don't have much to add. I just want to thank you. And I think it would be great if we could show it in different communities. I mean, should be possible really, but that I think would make a big difference. Because we need to also break the atmosphere of fear which has been generated by the Hindutva forces. I know in places like Leicester, for example, I've got friends who are scared of coming out and saying anything, young women, because they'll be harassed, But if we can show films or have some discussion there, then it might make a difference.
And in fact, Furqan, I might get in touch with you after this to see if we can show your film in Newham Council.
Great. Yeah, I also don't have much to add, but I would like to just thank, UK Asian Festival, QMUL, especially Ashvin, because I've been in touch with him for so long now, because he I remember now, because he was like one of the few people who, like the first people who saw the film, and, it just spread the word. I mean, he also like, somebody in Brazil emailed me that they want to do Portuguese subtitles for the film, and that was also Ashwin's acquaintance. So thanks a lot, Ashwin. And yeah, I think we should a film like this, and a lot of films. There's so much stuff that's coming out from India, from South Asia, from Kashmir, and as we are here, we should provide spaces to showcase this work and build some international solidarity. Thank you, guys.
So the film is going to be on YouTube till noon tomorrow. If you have friends or family you want to show it to, and also Furqan has kindly offered to make the film available to those of you who want to get in touch about doing that. In the chat as well, there are details of the UK Asian Film Festival YouTube channel, where I think a recording of this webinar is going to be available, and details of getting in touch with them. So thank you so much, everybody. And really grateful that you could make it for this.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you, panelists. And thanks everyone who tuned in. Take care now.